You are just a glorified maid." It was on my phone at 3:18 in the morning, a text from my sister. The same old contempt sanded down into a sharp line of entitlement. Then my mother's voice, raw and high, on the other end of a call I hadn't asked for. "We need $48,500 now. Mia's appendix ruptured. She's going into surgery. Pay it. I am an ER nurse. I have seen bodies fold, and I have seen people fold under the weight of their own lies. In medicine, the obvious is not always the whole truth. In families, the obvious is often a weapon. My first thought was not prayer or panic. It was procedure. If someone is truly crashing, the hospital treats first and counts later, at least in my experience. If she were bleeding out in a triage bay, she would be there whether she could pay or not. That knowledge is a kind of armor I wear a little too well. "Okay," I said into the phone, and I hit record. I played the part my mother expected, frantic, scrambling, the compliant child. I asked the questions she knew how to answer. "Where are you? What hospital? Doctor's name?" I let her panic build like a fever. I let her say the things she wanted heard. She obliged. Name, urgency. A Dr. Anthony Mitchell. A CPT code she read off at some point. 44970. Like a talisman she thought would make the money real. "It's the code for the surgery," she said. "They'll do it if we can get the funds." She said the amount out loud, $48,500. She said Mia's name, and then she said to me, like spit, "You have to fix this." I saved the voicemail. I emailed it to my cloud. I time-stamped everything. Voicemail 3:45 a.m. Filed. It wasn't bravado. It was evidence. When you grow up being the cart horse, you learn to shoulder burdens without complaint. My mother had trained me that way. My sister was the show pony, polished, photographed, presented to the world, light on her hooves, and never expected to carry anything that dirtied her shoes. That night the performance my mother wanted, panic met with my compliance, was a familiar script. Old Evelyn would have crumpled in 5 lines. Old Evelyn would have wired money. Old Evelyn would have believed the story, because family stories are easier to believe than the worst truths. Old Evelyn is dead. I did the math the way ER nurses do. I subtracted what was plausible from what was convenient. I thought about billing codes, about how CPT 44970 corresponds to an appendectomy, laparoscopic, and about how a genuine emergency shows up on an admission log the way a bruise shows under a black light. You don't have to believe me. You can simply know that my instincts leaned to verification instead of handing over my account number. I texted back as if I was still the frightened child and told them I was already on my way to handle it. Then I climbed into my car, put on my coat, and drove through a Chicago night polished with sleet. If you want to know how it ends, stick with me. It gets wild. Mercy General's driveway was a smear of fluorescent and sodium vapor when I pulled up. Inside, the triage desk smelled like antiseptic and coffee. I introduced myself as Evelyn Henderson, RN, and the triage clerk typed my query into the system while I watched her hands. She looked at me for a moment, recognition maybe of a nurse looking for a patient by name, and then the screen. No admission, no ER registration under Mia Henderson. The clerk said it again for the record. "We have no one by that name in triage, ma'am. We have no pending laparoscopic appendectomy on the books this morning." I wrote it down. 4:45 a.m. Mercy General Triage check. No record. The absence was as loud as a heartbeat. If they had really been in that hospital, there would be a log, a sticker, a triage color assigned, a red, a yellow, words on a board. Nothing. Empty. Back in the car, I checked the family's shared location app. 2 blue dots pulsed where they shouldn't. Veronica and Mia were at Prime Rib Vault, an upscale steakhouse downtown, a place with linen napkins and legal pads of wine lists. It was not where an appendix ruptures at 3 in the morning. It was where people celebrated. I called my mother back and let the line ring. She picked up, breathless, a different breath than panic. Laughter crept under her voice. I drove toward warm light. Snow melted into the gutters and made the roads slide like glass. When I walked into the restaurant, the heat hit me, and the clink of silverware felt like mockery. There they were. Veronica with the same affect she wore to funerals and openings, Mia in a coat that had never done a scrub shift, Gary at their table like a fourth wheel made of brass. Wine glasses caught the lamplight and threw it back in fat, unbothered reflections. I stood in the doorway and watched someone I'd been told was dying laugh and point. They were celebrating. They were eating. Watching them was not righteous. It was evidence. I did not take my phone out for a selfie or a dramatic post. I held the map in my palm and let the dots be what they were, objective. There are two ways to handle this moment. One is to let the grief and the betrayal turn you into a spectacle. The other is to collect what you have and go to work. I went to work. I called Sarah at First National. Sarah is the manager of the branch 3 blocks from my precinct. She's the woman who slid a bandage onto a stranger's hand in the lobby after I'd saved her niece in a car accident years back. She was awake. She answered with the kind of calm that comes from steady practice. "Can you meet me?" I asked. "It's about my family." She heard the compressed quiet in my voice and said yes. I held my evidence in my pocket like a scalpel. The voicemail, the triage absence, the location dots. My mother's demand for $48,500, uttered into a recording and therefore audible, admissible in the way a recorded oath sometimes is. I had copies of the family credit statements that showed the pattern. Cards maxed, payments shuffled, lifestyle spending that had been largely underwritten by me for years without proper acknowledgement. I had a list of previous wire transfers that had been made under coercion or compulsory loans. None of that was theatrical. It was the ledger of abuse. We met in the bank's conference room. Outside, the city kept its noise. Inside, it was sterile glass and the hum of the HVAC. Sarah put a notary stamp on a blank spot and then slid me a pen as if she knew what I was going to write. I wrote every clause down, the things that would make them stop having access to me in a way that allowed this to continue. I called it a mutual release in plain language. No contact, no more financial demands. I added a clause for liquidated damages, a pre-agreed sum payable should they contact me in breach, to give the contract teeth. I offered consideration, $5,000 to resolve the immediate conflict and to compensate me for the years of unpaid labor and the headaches of cleaning up their credit and reputational messes. $5,000 is not a ransom. It was a figure small enough to be credible and large enough to force a decision. When I slid the document across the table, they looked like people who thought they could script the world. Veronica's jaw ticked. Mia's face was smooth. Gary's hands kept finding the bread basket. I played the voicemail. They heard their own hysteria turned into recorded fact. Veronica's voice broke on the line. She said, "She needs $48,500. She invoked Dr. Anthony Mitchell's name. She read the number. It floated in the room like a coin. I handed Sarah the laptop and navigated to the Mercy General triage system on my phone. Screenshot, email up, no record. The absence looked like guilt. I gave them credit card statements. I gave them the map dot. I told them quietly, "Sign this. For $5,000, we close this. We cut contact. We create legal clarity." I put the envelope with the check on the table. This was not about revenge. This was about boundary enforcement. This was about making it inconvenient for them to do this again. It was about creating a legal instrument that said, "You will not have my life on layaway anymore." Veronica hesitated and then, in a motion I recognized from holidays and hospital bedsides, signed. Mia signed. Gary signed. Sarah notarized each signature. Hands touched paper and ink. The check came out of an account I could justify. They took it. They got up. They left arguing in the foyer, shouting incidental and human, overheard by the woman at the bank's teller window. They took the money for reasons I can never claim to fully understand. Maybe they needed cash in hand. Maybe they wanted to put a period on the conversation. Maybe they needed to have the certainty of control one more time. I do not know if they felt shame. I do not know if they felt relief. I only know the room felt lighter after they left, not because of money, but because I had finally acted. I called the prosecutors. I left messages. I filed reports. Outcome: indefinido. I made the call because the patron deserved documentation outside the circle of our family's conversations. But I will not pretend that arrest or conviction were ever guaranteed. I filed my part and stepped away, which in many cases is the hardest part of justice. What followed was not a dramatic legal exoneration. It was paperwork and small, steady decisions. I removed their access to my cards. I closed accounts. I changed passwords. I took the ambulance message off my phone 1 year later on purpose, the one that would have been an anxious tether to someone else's drama. I took a new lease on an apartment with a northern window. I bought paints. The childhood memory of the kitchen table came back to me in the quiet afternoons while the paint dried. My mother used to weigh us in tasks. I was expected to haul groceries, mend shirts, and ease the social edges for public appearances. Mia was praise and applause. My labor was invisible. The economics of abuse are not always a dramatic theft. Often they are a daily drainage. They are jokes about helping out. They are loans that never get repaid because the ledger is never allowed to balance. They are an expectation that your life will be subsidized by your quiet endurance. The settlement was not a cure. No contract erases history. But it created space. It created a legal barrier. It forced a decision. They could accept the terms and walk away with the money, or they could refuse and continue the slow siphoning. They chose the money and the signatures. Walking out of the bank that night, I felt a kind of vertigo. There is no dramatic violin here, no cinematic montage of triumphant revenge. There is only the clean sound of a pen scratching on paper and a seatbelt clicking as I drove away. I had made a choice that put my lifetime of caregiving into a legal frame. I had swapped the old pattern, my automatic rescuer role, for something else, a boundary that could be enforced. People sometimes ask how a medical professional becomes a detective in her own life. The answer is that training transfers. In the ER, evidence is the thing that keeps you honest. A blood pressure cuff, a lab result, an admission time. These are the facts that save you from panic. At home, the facts were voicemails, location dots, bank statements. I treated the betrayal like a case. Gather, verify, confront. After they left, Gary's shoes scuffed the bank carpet and their arguing faded through glass and traffic. I cashed the check into an account I had set up for legal fees. I paid a bill that needed paying. I tutored the paperwork into neat piles. I slept. 1 year later, I woke up in a place I had chosen myself. A third-floor apartment with light from a north window. A table where I kept my medical textbooks and a stack of canvases. I paint watercolors now. They are small and honest. Swaths of blue for days I get out of bed. Splotches of yellow for mornings when I make coffee. A thin, precise line of black for the fact that the ocean can be both beautiful and indifferent. Painting is a way of rediscovering my hands under my own name, not as instruments of invisible labor, but as creators of a life. I deleted the ambulance series of voicemails one afternoon when the sun was falling, and the building hummed like a living thing. The messages had once been a chain around my neck. Taking them off the phone felt like taking off a coat that no longer fit. There is no gloating in that gesture, just economy, a redistribution of attention toward myself. I do not pretend I am healed in some cinematic way. There are days when the old scripts crawl back and whisper, send the money, make them stop, be the one person who keeps the family afloat. There are bills and small resentments and moments when guilt tries to piggyback on survival. But I have tools now. The contract was one. The notary's stamp was another. My knowledge of hospital systems, my careful documentation, the willingness to make hard calls, these are the implements I use to build a boundary. People will ask whether I forgave them. I will answer that forgiveness is a private architecture and not a public performance. For myself, I have chosen distance. For them, there is consequence. For me, there is quiet and watercolor and a bank account that no longer feeds the performance of other people. I also want to be clear about what I did not do. I did not take a gun to the bank. I did not threaten. I did not resort to violence or illegal intimidation. I put paperwork in front of them. I used evidence. I made them face a choice. The law sometimes offers you only the blunt instrument of a signed sheet of paper, and sometimes that blunt instrument is enough. If you are listening and your family is a machine that drains you, I want you to know something practical. Documentation matters. Voicemails, timestamps, bank statements. These are not just cold paper. They are the scaffolding you can erect to support your boundary. If you can, get an ally, someone like Sarah, who will notarize and stand as a witness. Build your case with the same care you'd use to chart a patient's symptoms. And when the time comes, choose clarity over drama. There is one final thing I did that some might call petty and others might call merciful. I sent the notarized release to my mother's email and to Mia's. I copied it to the bank's records. Then I walked away. They called a week later and left 3 voicemails, blunt, angry, begging. I saved them, I filed them. I considered them receipts. I did not answer. The shocking truth behind my mother's scheme was not merely that she tried to stage a fake surgery. It was a pattern, a slow, constant extraction of my labor, my money, my dignity, justified by the language of family obligation. The surgery was the culmination, not the beginning. That is the part that hurt the most. The realization that the people who should have been my refuge treated me as an account to be tapped. There are readers who will want the finality of courtroom drama and prosecutors hauling people away. The transcript of my life does not contain that ending. If it did, I would tell you. The outcome of any criminal referral I made remains indefinido. What I will tell you is this. I took the tools I had, my nursing knowledge, my documented evidence, my bank's notary, and a willingness to make a hard offer, and I used them to change the dynamic. That is not a cure for everything. It is a practical remedy that allowed me to step out of a cycle that had defined my life. If this story resonates, if you see yourself in the cart horse's stoop or the show pony's glitter, remember there are sequences that help, verify, document, set a boundary, and create enforceable terms. And if you're still unsure where to start, there are resources and professionals who can guide you through legal instruments without you having to become a lawyer overnight. I still answer calls at odd hours from patients. I still chart vitals and tangle with insurance companies. I still remember that hospital smell when I see bleach. The difference now is that when my mother calls with an emergency at 3 a.m, I stop. I check. I ask for proof. I do not hand over my life on the basis of a dramatic story read into my phone late at night. One more practical note. If someone throws medical jargon at you, codes, doctor names, bills, treat it as information, not as an automatic sanction. CPT 4497EO is a code for a laparoscopic appendectomy. It means something in a billing system, but it does not, by itself, prove that an emergency is unfolding. In my experience, that bit of knowledge keeps you from being rushed into poor decisions. Use what you know. Verify what you can. and do not apologize for protecting your future. If this helped you recognize an abusive pattern or gave you a step to take, watch the next video I made about setting legal boundaries and reclaiming finances. There are templates, resource links, and a list of organizations that can help you document and enforce boundaries safely. I'm not here to vilify my mother forever. I'm here to tell you how a night that began with a demand for $48,500 ended with a notarized paper and a check for $5,000 that bought me, finally, some air. I sold them nothing but a finality they could cash and used the receipt to buy myself a new life. Sometimes survival is not the big dramatic rescue you imagine. Sometimes survival is firing your own. It is saying, I will not be your bank. I will not be your rescue. I will be the person who keeps her own receipts.